Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The woman's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Chris Hayes watched them tremble against the scratched surface of the ranger station desk, her knuckles white around a crumpled tissue that had long since stopped being useful. Mrs. Mitchell, Diane, she'd insisted he call her Diane, had driven 4 hours from Seattle to stand in his office, and the desperation in her eyes made something twist in his chest. "I know what they say about you." Her voice cracked. "I know about the Donovan boy in 2006, but you're the only one who's worked these trails longer than anyone else. You know this forest." Chris felt the familiar weight settle in his stomach. 5 years, and people still brought it up. 5 years since 8-year-old Marcus Donovan vanished on the Elk Ridge Trail, and despite 3 weeks of searching, they'd found nothing. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, nothing. Mrs. Mitchell, Diane. The search and rescue teams have been out there for 36 hours. They have dogs, helicopters. They're searching the wrong areas. She pulled out a worn topographic map, unfolding it with shaking hands. Lauren knows these trails. She wouldn't have gone off route without reason. She's meticulous. Her research sites are all marked here, see? But no one's checking the Hummingbird Trail section. They say it's too overgrown, too dangerous, but that's where the old growth specimens are. That's where she'd go. Chris looked at the map. The Hummingbird Trail. A knot of unease formed in his throat. That section had been officially closed since 2009, after 3 experienced hikers reported severe disorientation. The Park Service blamed it on the dense canopy and uniform terrain, endless Sitka spruce and western hemlock that all looked identical, valleys that echoed sound in confusing ways. But Chris had heard the other stories, the ones rangers told quietly over evening coffee. "The terrain there is complicated," he said carefully. "The moss is thick enough to hide foot placement. The fog banks roll in without warning, even with GPS." She had GPS. She had everything. Diane's voice broke. "She's my only daughter. Please. I've read every incident report from this park for the last 20 years. You're the one who found those lost climbers in 2008 when everyone else had given up. You're the one who tracked that injured hiker through that storm in 2010. You don't give up." Chris closed his eyes. The weight of Marcus Donovan pressed against his ribs like a physical thing. He could still see the boy's face from the missing poster, gap-toothed smile, NASA t-shirt. Could still hear the mother's sobs when they'd called off the search. "I'll go," he said quietly. "But I can't make promises." "I'm not asking for promises." Diane reached across the desk and gripped his hand with surprising strength. "I'm asking you to try." Chris loaded his pack with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over. Water purification tablets, emergency bivy, 50 feet of paracord, first aid kit, headlamp with fresh batteries. The Motorola radio clipped to his belt was older than most of the equipment the younger rangers carried, but it was reliable. His GPS unit was a Garmin E-Trex from 2009. Basic, but it had never failed him. The morning fog clung to the ground as he drove the service road to the Hummingbird Trail access point. Olympic National Park in October was a study in gray and green. Ancient trees disappearing into mist, the sound of his truck engine muffled by moisture-heavy air. The trailhead marker was barely visible, half consumed by sword ferns and salal. He radioed base. "Unit 7 to dispatch. Beginning search at Hummingbird Trail access, 0647 hours. "Copy that, Unit 7. Jenny's voice crackled through static. "Weather Service is calling for fog to persist until 1400 hours. Be careful out there, Chris." The trail started innocuously enough. Chris had hiked this section years ago, back when it was still maintained. Now the path was barely distinguishable from the surrounding forest. Nurse logs spawned new growth in chaotic patterns. Devil's Club reached across the trail with thorned stems. The air smelled of decay and growth in equal measure, that distinctive Pacific Northwest scent of things simultaneously dying and being born. He moved carefully, eyes scanning for any sign of Lauren's passage. A broken branch here, disturbed moss there. After 30 minutes, he found his first real clue. A small yellow flag tied to a hemlock branch about 5 feet off the ground. Research markers. Lauren had been here. Chris pulled out the map Diane had given him. According to Lauren's notes, she was studying nitrogen cycles in old-growth ecosystems. Her primary research site should be another 1.5 miles northeast, where a grove of 800-year-old Sitka spruce grew in unusual density. The trail narrowed. The canopy thickened. The world became a tunnel of green and gray, sound dampened by moss that coated everything like organic insulation. Chris's boots made almost no noise on the soft ground. Then he heard it. Chris. His name. Whispered. Close. He froze, hand instinctively going to the radio on his belt. His heart rate spiked, that immediate adrenaline response that no amount of training could fully suppress. Hello? His voice sounded strange in the muffled air. Lauren Mitchell? This is Ranger Hayes. Silence. Just the distant drip of condensation falling from branches. Chris breathed slowly through his nose. 5 years ago, during the Marcus Donovan search, he'd started hearing things. The therapist had called it hypervigilance, a trauma response, the mind playing tricks in isolation and stress. He'd learned to identify it, to talk himself down. This is just stress. Diane Mitchell's desperation, the anniversary of Marcus approaching, your brain processing old trauma. He continued forward, but the unease remained, a low hum beneath his thoughts. By mid-morning, Chris had found 3 more yellow markers, leading him deeper into the grove. The trees here were massive, trunks 6 feet in diameter, bark furrowed and ancient. They'd been growing before Columbus reached America, before the English language existed in its modern form. The scale of them made Chris feel appropriately insignificant. Lauren's primary research site was marked with a small orange flag attached to a metal stake. Her equipment was still here. A soil testing kit, a notebook in a waterproof bag, a collapsible measuring stick. But no Lauren. Chris examined the notebook. The last entry was dated 2 days ago. Site 7, 2:45 p.m. soil samples collected from quadrants AD. Nitrogen levels consistent with previous readings. Noticed unusual fungal growth on nurse log NL3, not in field guide. Will photograph tomorrow. Something strange about the acoustics here. My voice sounds like it's coming from different directions. Maybe the tree density? We'll ask Dr. Patterson. Chris looked around the grove. The trees stood in a rough circle, their canopies interlocking so completely that almost no sky was visible. The light was gray-green and diffuse, sourceless. And she was right about the acoustics. When he'd spoken earlier, the sound had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Lauren Mitchell, he called out. This is Park Ranger Christopher Hayes. If you can hear me, please respond. His voice bounced strangely, seeming to come from behind him, then to his left, then from directly overhead. It was disorienting. No response came. Chris circled the site, looking for tracks. The ground here was more mineral soil than moss, and he found them. Boot prints, women's size, heading northeast, away from the trail, deeper into the unmarked forest. He radioed base. Unit 7 to dispatch. Found subject's research site and equipment, following tracks northeast from coordinates. He read off the GPS numbers. Subject appears to have left the area on foot. Copy, Unit 7. Do you need backup? Chris hesitated. The smart thing would be to wait for the full search team. But Lauren had already been missing for 36 hours. Every hour decreased survival odds, especially with night temperatures dropping into the low 40s. Negative dispatch. Tracks are fresh enough to follow. I'll report in every 30 minutes. Roger that. Be safe, Chris. He followed the boot prints. They moved with purpose at first. Steady stride, direct line. But after a quarter mile, something changed. The prints became erratic. One set of tracks seemed to loop back on itself, then veer sharply left. Then another set, or were they the same set? Headed right. Chris knelt, examining them more closely. His stomach went cold. These were all Lauren's boots. Same tread pattern, but they overlapped in impossible ways. She'd walked in circles here. Multiple circles. The tracks crossed and recrossed, creating a tangled pattern that made his eyes hurt to follow. This was what disorientation looked like from above. This was how people got lost even when they thought they knew where they were going. "Lauren," he called again. "Can you hear me?" The forest swallowed his voice, and then, faintly, he heard it again. Chris. His name, but this time it sounded like his own voice. The hair on his arm stood up. "That's not possible. That's not real. You're stressed. You're projecting." "Lauren Mitchell." He forced strength into his voice. "I'm here to help. Follow my voice." Chris. Again. His voice, speaking his name. But he hadn't spoken. He spun around. The forest looked the same in every direction. Endless trunks, endless moss, endless gray-green light. "Get it together. You've been in worse situations. This is just terrain and acoustics and your brain playing tricks." But his hands were shaking as he pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, seemed to settle on north, then drifted east. Then south. Compass malfunction? Mineral deposits in the ground? Or, no, stay rational. Equipment fails. That's normal. He checked his GPS. The screen showed his position, but something was wrong. According to the device, he'd only traveled 0.3 miles from Lauren's research site, but he'd been walking for at least 20 minutes. He should have covered over a mile. Chris looked back the way he'd come. Through the trees, he could see his own boot prints in a patch of exposed soil. They led in a gentle curve, back toward where he was standing. He'd been walking in circles. Panic started as a flutter in his chest. That familiar feeling from 5 years ago, from the endless days searching for Marcus Donovan. The feeling that the forest itself was working against him. Chris forced himself to stop, to breathe, to think. Standard procedure for disorientation. Stop moving. Establish a base point. Use multiple navigation methods. He pulled a small can of orange spray paint from his pack and marked the nearest tree with a large X. Reference point established. He checked his watch. 11:23 a.m. He'd been in the field for nearly 5 hours. The fog should be lifting soon, which would help with visibility and orientation. Chris pulled out his water bottle and drank. The cold liquid helped clear his head. This was solvable. Terrain-induced disorientation was a known phenomenon. The uniform forest, the way sound behaved strangely, the thick fog, all of it created conditions for getting turned around. Nothing supernatural about it, just challenging geography. He studied Lauren's tracks more carefully, trying to understand her pattern. She'd circled this area multiple times, but why? Was she lost or was she looking for something? Then he saw it. Another yellow flag, partially hidden behind a massive fallen log. He approached carefully, testing each foot placement. The log was at least 8 feet in diameter, covered in a thick carpet of moss and hosting an entire ecosystem of ferns and seedlings. Lauren's boot prints led directly to it. On the other side of the log, Chris found her first research notebook, different from the one at the site. This one was older, water-damaged, pages wrinkled and stained. He opened it carefully. The entries weren't Lauren's. The handwriting was different, shakier. The name inside the cover made his blood go cold. Property of Dr. Robert Chen, University of Washington Forestry Department, 1997. Chris knew that name. Dr. Chen had disappeared in Olympic National Park in 1997. They'd found his body 3 weeks later, less than a mile from where he'd been reported missing. Heart attack, the coroner had ruled, but Chris remembered the whispers among the older rangers, how Chen had been found in a place he'd already searched, how his route made no logical sense, how he'd apparently walked in circles for days despite being an experienced outdoorsman. With shaking hands, Chris flipped through the notebook. The entries started normally. Observations about forest composition, soil acidity, species diversity. Then they changed. Day 4. I keep hearing my own voice, calling my name, but I'm alone. Day 5. The trees look the same. I've marked them, but I keep finding my own marks. Am I walking in circles? My compass says north, but nothing makes sense. Day 6. I'm not alone. Something is here, using my voice, using my words. It sounds exactly like me, but it's not me. How can something sound exactly like me? Day 7. I understand now. It doesn't want to kill me, it wants me to forget. Forget which direction is real. Forget which thoughts are mine. Forget which voice is speaking. I can feel it in my head, drinking. The last entry was barely legible. Day 8. Which one am I? Chris's hands were trembling badly now. He looked around the grove. The gray-green light seemed oppressive suddenly. The silence too complete. This is just a coincidence. Chen was mentally unstable at the end. Dehydration, hypothermia, they cause hallucinations. This doesn't mean... Chris, his voice again. But this time it came from directly behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Just trees and fog and moss. This isn't real, he said aloud. Lauren Mitchell, if you can hear me, I'm here to help. Make noise, any noise. Silence. Then faintly, from somewhere to his left. Help me. A woman's voice. Lauren's voice. He couldn't be sure. The acoustics distorted everything. Lauren, keep talking. I'm coming toward your voice. Help me, Chris. He moved toward the sound, pushing through sword ferns. His radio crackled with static. He grabbed it. Unit 7 to dispatch, do you copy? More static. Then, through the white noise. Unit 7, this is dispatch. You're breaking up. What's your status? Chris stopped. The voice on the radio sounded wrong. Too clear. Too close. Chris, where are you? The voice on the radio asked. But it wasn't Jenny's voice anymore. It was his own voice. Chris, I'm lost. Help me. He dropped the radio like it had burned him. Okay. Okay. Think. You're experiencing auditory hallucinations. Stress response. Trauma activation. The anniversary of Marcus Donovan is in 3 days. Your brain is in hypervigilance mode. This is textbook PTSD response. But Chen's notebook. Lauren's circular tracks. His own compass spinning. Chris pulled out his GPS again. The screen flickered. The coordinates were changing, but he wasn't moving. According to the device, he was simultaneously at 3 different locations, hundreds of feet apart. Equipment failure. Has to be. Magnetic anomaly in the rocks. Chris. His voice, behind him again. He didn't turn around this time. Instead, he opened his pack and pulled out the orange spray paint. He painted a large arrow on the nearest tree trunk, pointing back the way he'd come. Then another arrow on the next tree. And another. Creating a visible trail, something concrete and real that didn't rely on electronics or compasses or his own unreliable senses. As he painted the 4th arrow, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. On a tree about 30 feet to his left, there was already an orange X. His mark. From earlier. But that was impossible. He'd been moving in a straight line, marking trees as he went. He couldn't be back at his starting point. Unless you've been walking in circles the entire time. No. He said aloud. No. I marked a clear trail. He looked back at the trees he'd just painted. The arrows were there, clear and bright. He could see the paint gleaming wetly. He turned to follow them back. The arrows led him in a circle, back to where he was standing. Chris felt something crack inside his chest. That same feeling from 5 years ago, when he'd realized they weren't going to find Marcus Donovan. When he'd understood with terrible clarity that sometimes people vanish and there's no explanation, no closure, no reason. This isn't real, he whispered. This is a hallucination. I'm dehydrated. I'm stressed. This isn't real. But it is real, a voice said. Chris looked up. Standing 20 feet away, partially obscured by fog, was a young woman in hiking clothes. dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, dirt-streaked face. Lauren Mitchell, from the photo Diane had shown him. Lauren? His voice came out hoarse. Are you hurt? She didn't respond, just stared at him with hollow eyes. Lauren, I'm Ranger Hayes. Your mother sent me. We need to get you out of here. You can't leave, Lauren said, but her mouth didn't quite match the words. There was a half-second delay like a badly dubbed film. Chris took a step toward her. Are you injured? Can you walk? You can't leave, she repeated. Same words, same hollow tone. None of us can leave. Behind her, another figure emerged from the fog. A man in ranger uniform, older, gray-haired. Chris recognized him from photographs in the station. Ranger Tom Bellamy disappeared in 2003. Then another figure, a young boy in a NASA t-shirt, gap-toothed smile, Marcus Donovan. Chris's legs went weak. No, you're not real. You're not. We're as real as you are, Lauren said. Or we were. Before it took the part of us that knew which way was out, the part that remembered who we were. Now we're just echoes. More figures stepped out of the fog. 12 people. 24. All with the same hollow eyes. All with voices that didn't quite sync with their lips. It lives here, Lauren continued, in the spaces between thoughts, in the uncertainty. It feeds on the moment when you stop trusting your own mind, when you can't tell what's real and what's not, and then you become part of it. Chris backed away. His training, his rationality, his entire understanding of the world was screaming that this couldn't be happening. But Dr. Chen's notebook was still in his hand. Lauren was still standing there. Marcus Donovan was still looking at him with dead eyes. I found you, Chris said to the boy. I'm so sorry. I looked for you. I looked everywhere. I know, Marcus said. I heard you calling, but I couldn't remember which way your voice was coming from. I couldn't remember which way was out. The radio on Chris's belt crackled. His own voice came through. Unit 7 to dispatch. I'm lost. I'm lost. I don't know which way is real. He looked at the orange spray paint marks on the trees. They were multiplying now, appearing on trunks he hadn't painted. Arrows pointing in every direction. His own handwriting, but he hadn't painted them. Or had he? How long had he been out here? Hours? Days? He checked his watch. 11:23 a.m. But that couldn't be right. It had been 11:23 when he'd stopped. That was... how long ago? Minutes? Hours? The watch kept ticking. 11:23. 11:23. 11:23. You're starting to forget, Lauren said softly. It's drinking from you now. Soon you won't remember which thoughts are yours and which ones it's feeding you. You won't remember which direction you came from. You won't remember why you came at all. Chris tried to focus. There had been something important. Someone waiting for him. A woman with shaking hands. Diane Mitchell. Lauren's mother. Your mother is waiting, he said to Lauren. She needs you. She'll forget me eventually, Lauren replied. They all do. That's what it wants. For us to become nobody. Nothing. Just voices in the fog. No. Chris forced strength into his voice. No, I'm getting you out of here. He grabbed Lauren's arm. Her skin was cold. Too cold, but solid. Real. Come on, we're leaving. Now. He pulled her forward, choosing a direction at random. West. Or was it north? The compass was useless. The GPS was lying, but he still had his legs. He could still walk. He could still move. The other figures watched them go. Marcus Donovan's face faded into the fog. Chris and Lauren walked. The trees looked identical. The fog pressed close. His watch remained frozen at 11:23. But he kept moving because movement was action, and action was the opposite of surrender. You can't save me, Lauren said quietly. I'm already part of it. Have been for days. This is just the memory of me wearing my shape. I don't believe that. Neither did I. At first, they walked for what felt like hours. Chris's legs ached. His water was running low. The light never changed. Same gray-green dimness, same sourceless illumination. He saw his orange marks on trees but couldn't tell if they were leading him out or deeper in. Then ahead, he saw something different. A break in the trees. Lighter fog. The suggestion of open space. "That's not real," Lauren warned. "It shows you what you want to see." But Chris kept moving toward it. What choice did he have? Stop and become another figure in the fog? Another voice calling his own name? The break in the trees grew closer. He could see sky now. Gray sky, but sky. He could see the edge of the forest. "Chris," Lauren said, "what's your daughter's name?" He stopped. "I don't have a daughter." "Are you sure?" The question sent ice through his veins. Did he have a daughter? He tried to remember. His life before this forest. His home. His family. There was a house. He thought there was a house and someone. A woman. A child. Or was that someone else's memory? "You're forgetting," Lauren said gently. "It's taken that from you. Soon it'll take your name. Then it'll take you." Chris looked at his hands. Ranger uniform, radio on his belt, orange spray paint can in his pack. These were concrete things, real things. But who was he? Christopher Hayes, Ranger, 38 years old. No, 42? No, 38. Definitely 38. Worked at Olympic National Park for 12 years. Or was it 15? Marcus Donovan. He'd been searching for Marcus Donovan. 5 years ago. Or was it yesterday? "Who am I?" he whispered. Lauren didn't answer. When he looked at her, she was fading, becoming transparent, becoming fog. "I'm sorry," her voice said, now coming from everywhere. "I'm sorry you came looking." Chris stumbled toward the break in the trees. The light ahead was bright now, almost painful. He could hear voices, real voices, different from his own. Someone calling a name. His name. He pushed through the last of the ferns and found himself standing at a trailhead. There was a parking lot, a ranger station, people in uniform. One of them saw him and ran over. "Jesus Christ, are you okay? We've been looking for you for 3 days." 3 days. But his watch said... What did his watch say? Chris tried to form words. "I was searching for..." Who had he been searching for? There was a woman, someone's mother, someone missing. "Get him some water," someone said. "Get the medic." They wrapped a thermal blanket around his shoulders. Someone pressed a water bottle into his hands. The liquid was warm and real, and it helped clear some of the fog from his mind. "Ranger Hayes," a woman's voice said. He looked up. It was Jenny from dispatch. "You radioed in 3 days ago that you were entering the Hummingbird Trail. When you didn't check in, we launched a full search. Where have you been?" The memories were fragmenting, sliding away. "Lauren Mitchell. I was looking for Lauren Mitchell." Jenny's face went pale. "Chris, there is no Lauren Mitchell. The only missing person report we have is for you." The world tilted. No. Her mother came to the station. Diane Mitchell. She had a map. Her daughter was doing research. "Chris, no one came to the station. You radioed in saying you were doing a routine patrol of the closed trails, that's all." He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't hold him. Someone caught him before he fell. In his pocket, he felt something. He pulled it out. An old notebook. Water damaged. Property of Dr. Robert Chen, 1997. But how did he have Chen's notebook? Chen had died in 1997. The notebook should be in evidence. In storage. Unless he'd found it out there. Unless all of it had been real. "The compass," Chris said urgently. "Check your compass. Check if it works near the Hummingbird Trail." One of the rangers pulled out a compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. "Magnetic anomaly," the ranger said. "We know about it. It's why the trail's closed. Mineral deposits in the bedrock." magnetic anomaly, auditory hallucinations from stress, disorientation from uniform terrain, all explainable. But Chris looked back at the forest. In the fog between the trees, he could see figures standing, watching. A young woman with dark hair, a boy in a NASA t-shirt, a gray-haired ranger. They were as still as the trees themselves. "Did you find anyone else out there?" he asked quietly. "No," Jenny said. "Just you, Chris. Just you." They took him to the hospital. Dehydration, mild hypothermia, exhaustion. He'd walked nearly 40 miles in 3 days, most of it in circles. The doctor said he was lucky. A few more days and they might not have found him. Chris lay in the hospital bed staring at the ceiling. The rational part of his brain cataloged everything: stress-induced hallucination, terrain disorientation, PTSD flashback triggered by the anniversary of Marcus Donovan's disappearance. All of it could be explained. But Dr. Chen's notebook sat on the bedside table. The Rangers had confirmed it was authentic, the one that had never been recovered from Chen's body, the one that should have been impossible for Chris to find. And when Chris closed his eyes, he could still hear them. His own voice, calling his name. Lauren's voice, saying she was sorry. Marcus Donovan saying he'd heard Chris calling but couldn't remember which way the voice was coming from. The door opened. A woman stepped in. Blonde hair, tired eyes, professional attire. For a moment, Chris's heart stopped. Diane Mitchell. But when she spoke, it was wrong. "Ranger Hayes? I'm Dr. Patterson from Psychiatric Services. I'd like to talk to you about what happened out there." Not Diane, someone else. Diane Mitchell didn't exist, had never existed, but Chris could still feel her hands shaking against the desk, could still hear her voice. "I know about the Donovan boy in 2006, but you're the only one who's worked these trails longer than anyone else." "I'm fine," Chris said to Dr. Patterson. "Just got turned around. It happens. The other rangers say you kept asking about someone named Lauren Mitchell, that you said you were searching for her. Confusion from dehydration. I'm better now." Dr. Patterson made a note. "We'd like to keep you for observation for a few days. You've been through a significant trauma. It's important we make sure." I said I'm fine. But he wasn't fine, because when Dr. Patterson left and the room was quiet, Chris pulled out his phone. Against his better judgment, against everything rational, he opened the browser and typed, "Lauren Mitchell, University of Washington, biology student." The search returned nothing. He tried, "Diane Mitchell, Seattle." Dozens of results, but none of them were her. None of them had a missing daughter. None of them had driven 4 hours to beg him for help. Chris set down the phone and looked out the hospital window. Through his reflection in the glass, he could see the forest in the distance, the Olympic Range, covered in ancient trees and fog. Somewhere in that forest, people were walking in circles, hearing their own voices, forgetting their names, becoming echoes. And Chris knew, with absolute certainty that defied every rational explanation, that Lauren Mitchell was real, that Diane Mitchell was real, that somewhere a mother was still waiting for news about her daughter. But he also knew that if he tried to go back, if he tried to search for her again, he would lose himself completely. The forest would drink what was left of his certainty, his identity, his grip on what was real. He couldn't save Lauren Mitchell, just like he couldn't save Marcus Donovan, just like he couldn't save any of them. Because some places don't want to give back what they've taken. Some places feed on the moment you realize you're lost, and once they've tasted you, they never fully let go. Chris touched the window. His reflection looked back at him. Or was that his reflection? For just a moment, he wasn't sure. And in that moment of uncertainty, somewhere deep in the Olympic forest, something drank. Thank you for reading to the end. If you appreciated this narrative, consider following for more engaging stories. What's your interpretation of what happened to Chris in those 3 days? Was Lauren real, or was she a manifestation of the forest's influence? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. The call came through at 6:47 a.m., bypassing the usual dispatch channels. Daniel Chen was halfway through his first coffee when his personal cell phone buzzed against the kitchen counter of his ranger station cottage. "Mr. Chen? Daniel Chen?" The woman's voice trembled with controlled desperation. "My name is Patricia Hayes. Someone at the Volunteer Search Center gave me your number. They said you have a way of finding people." Daniel closed his eyes. He hated when people phrased it like that, as if he possessed some mystical power instead of just paying attention to details others missed. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm not sure what you've been told, but my daughter Lauren has been missing for 36 hours. She's 16. The official search teams have been out since yesterday afternoon, but they're not..." Her voice cracked. "Please, they said you found that boy last summer when everyone else had given up. They said you just knew." The boy, 8-year-old Marcus Riley, who'd wandered from his family's campsite in the Quinault area. Daniel had felt it then, that prickling wrongness that made him turn west instead of east, ignore the search grid and follow something he couldn't name. He'd found Marcus hypothermic but alive, curled beneath a fallen cedar 3 miles from where logic said he should be. His supervisor had praised his excellent field instincts. His fellow rangers had joked about his spooky bloodhound nose. Nobody said the word that Daniel sometimes whispered to himself in the dark: sensitive. "Tell me about Lauren," he said, already reaching for his park map. Patricia Hayes explained in fragments: school camping trip, 17 students from Port Angeles High School, 2 teachers supervising, campsite at Hoe Lake Trail Junction. Lauren had asked to use the bathroom around 8 p.m. the night before last. When she hadn't returned after 15 minutes, her friend went looking. They found her headlamp on the trail, still switched on, pointing into the forest. Nothing else. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no response to calls or whistles. "Which trail marker?" Daniel asked, marking coordinates on his topographic map of the Hoh rainforest. "Mile 4.3 near the moss grove, the really dense one with those huge maples." Daniel's pen stopped. The moss grove. He'd patrolled that area twice last month and both times left feeling watched, feeling like the silence there pressed too close. The Hoh rainforest was already one of the quietest places in Olympic National Park. Temperate rainforest muffled sound naturally, but the moss grove took it further, an absence of noise that felt deliberate. "I'll head out within the hour," he told Patricia Hayes. "What's your cell number?" After she gave it and thanked him 5 times in succession, Daniel stood in his kitchen and stared at the map. Mile 4.3, the moss grove. He tried to remember what exactly had bothered him there, but the memory slipped away like fog through fingers. He packed his gear with the methodical precision of a decade's experience. Garmin eTrex GPS, though cell towers were sparse and coordinates could be unreliable. Silva compass, first aid kit, emergency blanket, water purification tablets, 550 paracord, fire starter, protein bars, his radio fully charged, extra batteries for his Pelican headlamp, the Leatherman multi-tool his father had given him when he first joined the Park Service. At the last moment, he added something he rarely carried, a small digital voice recorder. If his intuition was going to guide him, he wanted documentation of his own thought process, evidence that he was thinking clearly, making rational decisions, evidence he wasn't losing his mind. The drive to the Hoh rainforest trailhead took 40 minutes through dense morning fog. Daniel checked in with the incident commander, a gruff career ranger named Rollins who looked like he'd been awake for 30 hours straight. "Chen, good. We need bodies on the grid." Rollins jabbed at a laminated map divided into search sectors. "You take section Delta 7, we've been over it once, but..." "I'd like to start at the last known position," Daniel interrupted. "Mile marker 4.3. Rollins frowned. "We've had teams through there 6 times. Bloodhounds lost the scent after 20 yards. It's like she vanished." "I know. I still want to start there." Something in Daniel's tone made Rollins pause. Then he nodded slowly. "Your funeral. Radio check every 30 minutes. And Chen, don't go cowboy on me. This forest doesn't forgive heroes." The hike to mile 4.3 took Daniel 90 minutes at a steady pace. The Hoh rainforest lived up to its reputation. Sitka spruce and western hemlock towered overhead, their trunks wrapped in club moss and licorice ferns. Everything dripped, everything grew. The air itself seemed green, thick with moisture and the sweet rot smell of decomposition. Daniel passed 2 other search teams on his way up, volunteers with orange vests and tired eyes. They nodded grimly. Nobody had found anything. He reached the moss grove just before noon. The trail marker confirmed it, 4.3 miles, elevation 872 feet. The grove opened to his right, a cathedral of big-leaf maples so heavily draped in moss they looked like melting sculptures. The moss hung in curtains and waterfalls in layers so thick the actual branches disappeared beneath them. Daniel stopped walking and listened. Nothing. Not bird calls or insect hum or wind through branches. Just his own breathing and the faint drip of condensation falling from moss to earth. That wrongness he'd felt before intensified. His scalp prickled. Every instinct screamed that something here was off. Though he couldn't articulate what, he pulled out the voice recorder and pressed record. Noon, October 14th, 2008. Mile marker 4.3 Hoh Lake Trail. Beginning search pattern around last known position of Lauren Hayes. Current temperature approximately 52 degrees, overcast, visibility good. He paused, feeling significant unease. Environmental factors or intuition, unclear. Daniel stepped off the trail into the moss grove. Immediately, the silence deepened. His boots made no sound on the spongy ground. The moss absorbed everything. Footfalls, breath, thought. He moved in expanding circles from where Lauren's headlamp had been found, scanning the forest floor for any sign. Disturbed earth, broken vegetation, a scrap of fabric. His rational mind cataloged the search pattern. His intuitive mind screamed that he was being observed. After 20 minutes, he found something. Not evidence, not a clue, just a feeling, sudden and overwhelming, that he should turn left. Not toward anything visible, not toward any logical search grid coordinate, just left. Daniel clicked the recorder back on. 12:23 p.m., experiencing strong directional impulse, no visual or auditory stimulus. Following it, he paused, documenting this for accuracy. He walked left, deeper into the moss grove off any established trail. The maples grew closer here, their moss beards forming curtains he had to push through. The world shrank to green twilight. His GPS signal flickered and died. Then he heard it. Help! Faint, distant, unmistakably young and female. Help me, please. Daniel's heart kicked into overdrive. Lauren? He shouted. Lauren Hayes. I'm here. I can't find the trail. Everything looks the same. The voice came from ahead and slightly right. Daniel plunged forward, pushing through hanging moss, his radio in hand. Rollins, this is Chen. I have verbal contact with the subject. Moving toward... Static. His radio crackled with interference, then went silent. He checked the battery. Full charge. Checked the frequency, correct. The radio simply refused to transmit. Lauren, keep talking, Daniel called. Follow my voice. I'm trying, I'm so turned around. Which way are you? Listen for my voice, I'm coming to you. He moved toward where the voice had come from, but the moss swallowed direction. Sound bounced strangely here, seemed to come from multiple places at once. He stopped, listening intently. Please hurry, the voice said, and something about the tone made Daniel's intuition flare bright red. He pulled out his voice recorder with shaking hands. 12:31 p.m. Heard voice claiming to be Lauren Hayes, moving toward sound. Radio communication failed. GPS non-functional. Something wrong with... Daniel? The voice again, but different now. Closer. His name in a teenager's uncertain soprano. Daniel Chen? My mom called you. She said you'd come. How did the voice know his name? Patricia Hayes might have mentioned it to Lauren before the trip, or... I'm so scared, the voice continued. I've been walking in circles. I think something's following me. Daniel stood perfectly still. That prickling along his scalp had become a roar. Every intuitive sense he'd ever trusted screamed wrongness. "Lauren," he said carefully, "what color jacket are you wearing?" Silence. Long enough that he knew. Then, blue. A blue North Face jacket. "Please, you have to help me. I can hear it moving through the trees." Patricia Hayes had said Lauren was wearing red. Bright red, so she'd be visible. Daniel backed up slowly, his rational mind catching up to his intuitive one. That wasn't Lauren. That was something using Lauren's voice or something close to it. Something that had learned her name, her situation, enough details to be convincing. The voice came again, but this time he heard the wrongness clearly. "Daniel, please, it's getting dark. I'm only 16. My mom is so worried." The pleading tone was perfect. Too perfect. Like someone performing worry rather than feeling it. He turned and started walking back the way he'd come, trying to maintain silence, trying not to run. The moss absorbed his footsteps. Behind him, the voice continued its litany. "Don't leave me, please don't leave me. Daniel, I'm scared. Daniel, Daniel." His name stretched and distorted, becoming something almost inhuman. Daniel pushed through a curtain of moss and stumbled into a small clearing he didn't remember crossing. The maples formed a circle here, their moss-draped branches creating a dome overhead. In the center of the clearing stood a figure. For one disorienting moment, he thought it was Lauren. 16, dark hair, slight build. Then his eyes focused and he saw the wrongness. The figure stood too still, back turned, shoulders at an angle no living spine could maintain. "You found me," the figure said without turning. Still that teenage girl's voice. Still Lauren's voice. "Thank you for not giving up." "Turn around," Daniel said. His hand moved to the knife on his belt. The figure tilted its head, just the head, body remaining motionless. "I've been waiting. It's so lonely here in the moss. Turn around and show me your face." "I'm afraid," the figure said. "I'm afraid if I turn around, you'll see what the forest made me." Daniel's intuition was shrieking now. His rational mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Hallucination? Hypothermia-induced confusion? Had he somehow gotten disoriented, lost track of... The figure turned. It wore Lauren's face like a mask that didn't fit correctly. The features were right. Dark eyes, straight nose, narrow chin, but assembled slightly wrong, as if something had recreated a human face from description alone. The mouth moved when it spoke, but the eyes stayed fixed. "I'm not her," it said, and for the first time the voice sounded honest. "But I know where she is." Daniel's hand closed on his knife handle. "What are you?" "Lost. Like her. Like everyone who wanders too deep." The thing wearing Lauren's face smiled, and the expression was all wrong. "The forest keeps us here. We're part of the moss now. Part of the silence." "You're not real," Daniel said, though his voice shook. "You're a hallucination. The GPS failure, the radio interference, they're just technical." "You know better," the not Lauren interrupted. "You've always known. That's why you find them when others can't. You feel us. You hear us calling." A sound behind him made Daniel spin. Another figure stood at the clearing's edge. This one wore the face of Marcus Riley, the 8-year-old boy he'd found last summer. "You didn't really find me," the not Marcus said in a child's cheerful voice. "I found you. I called you in." More figures emerged from between the moss-curtained maples. Some wore faces he recognized from old missing person reports, cold cases, decades-old disappearances. Others wore faces that seemed random, generic, like placeholder images. They formed a ring around him, all standing too still, all watching with eyes that didn't blink. "We need you," the not Lauren said. "Someone who can hear us. Someone who can join us. The forest is so quiet. We want someone new to talk to." Daniel's back hit the trunk of a massive maple. Moss cushioned the impact, soft and strangely warm. The figures closed in, moving in unison, moving wrong, gliding more than walking. His recorder was still running. He fumbled it out of his pocket and held it up like a talisman. I'm documenting this. If I don't return, they'll find this recording. They'll know what happened. The Not Lauren tilted its head with that same disturbing angle. They'll find static. White noise. The forest doesn't let recordings leave either. The circle tightened. Daniel could smell them now. Not decay, but absence. Like air with all the oxygen removed. His vision started to tunnel. The wrongness pressed against his skull from the inside. Then, impossibly, he heard a new voice. Small, scared, but real in a way the others weren't. Who are you talking to? He turned. Standing at the clearing's edge, barely visible through the moss curtains, was a teenage girl in a red jacket. Muddy, exhausted, eyes wide with terror, but alive. Genuinely alive. Lauren, Daniel whispered. I heard voices, she said. I've been following voices for 2 days. They keep saying they'll lead me out, but they just circle back. Are you real? Please tell me you're real. The figures around Daniel had frozen, their attention shifting to Lauren. The Not Lauren spoke, and now its voice came from everywhere at once. Another one. Good. We'll have you both. Daniel made a choice. The same kind of choice he'd made 1,000 times, trusting instinct over logic. He lunged forward, grabbing the real Lauren's arm, and ran. Behind them, the voices rose in a chorus of overlapping pleas and threats and promises. The moss tried to hold their feet. The maples seemed to shift position, blocking their path. Daniel's compass spun wildly, useless. His GPS stayed dark. But beneath the wrongness, beneath the fear, his intuition burned clear and bright. It pointed like an arrow through the chaos. Not toward safety, toward right, toward the path that existed beneath the lies. He followed it blindly, dragging Lauren behind him. They crashed through moss curtains, stumbled over roots, slid down muddy embankments. The voices followed, calling their names, begging them to stop, to listen, to understand. Don't answer them, Daniel gasped. Don't respond, just run. What are they? Lauren sobbed. I don't know. Lost. Trapped. Something that takes voices and makes them hollow. He hauled her over a fallen log. Just keep moving. The forest fought them. Branches caught their clothing. Roots appeared where no roots should be. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. Then, impossibly, Daniel heard flowing water. The Ho River. He'd drifted further north than he realized. If he could reach the river, follow it downstream, it would lead them back to established trails. Water couldn't be manipulated. Water flowed only one way. They burst through a final curtain of moss and stumbled onto riverbank. The Ho River churned past, gray-green and swollen with recent rain. On the far bank, Daniel could see orange vests, the search teams. Here, he shouted, waving his arms. Over here. The searchers turned, spotted them, started scrambling to find a safe crossing point. Daniel looked back. The forest edge was empty. No figures, no voices, just moss-draped maples dripping in the afternoon light. Lauren collapsed onto the rocky shore, sobbing. They kept saying they'd help me. They sounded so real. I followed them for hours. They kept leading me in circles, and I couldn't tell anymore if I was hearing them or just remembering them. Daniel knelt beside her, his hands shaking. You're safe now, I've got you. But he looked back at the forest one more time and whispered too quietly for Lauren to hear. How do I know I really got out? The official report said Lauren Hayes had become disoriented by the unusual acoustic properties of the moss grove, potentially experiencing auditory hallucinations due to stress and hypothermia. Ranger Daniel Chen had located her using standard search protocols and professional instinct. Everyone praised his field skills. Nobody mentioned the voices. Daniel listened to his voice recorder that night in his cottage. Most of it was static, as the thing wearing Lauren's face had promised. But in the gaps between white noise, he could hear himself talking, documenting his search pattern. His voice sounded strange, flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. In the final seconds before the recording cut to pure static, he heard something else. Voices in chorus, dozens of them, overlapping. "Come back, Daniel. We're waiting. We'll always be waiting. The forest keeps what it calls." Then his own voice, barely a whisper. "I understand now. I understand." He didn't remember saying that. Daniel erased the recording, told himself it was corrupted data, electromagnetic interference, anything but proof of something living in the moss grove. Something that collected the lost. Something that might have collected him, at least partly, at least enough to plant a seed of doubt about what was real and what was echo. 3 weeks later, he found himself standing at the mile 4.3 marker, staring into the moss grove. He couldn't remember deciding to come here. His shift had been scheduled for the Quinault sector, yet here he was, pulled by something he couldn't name. The silence pressed close. The moss hung heavy, and somewhere deep in the green twilight, he thought he heard voices calling his name. Daniel turned and walked back down the trail, but part of him wondered if he'd ever really left. Thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, consider following for more immersive stories. What's your interpretation of Daniel's final fate? Did he truly escape, or did something from the moss grove come back with him? I'd love to read your theories in the comments. The ferry's diesel engine coughed into silence, leaving Christopher standing alone on the dock as the boat retreated into the gray November mist. Isle Royale stretched before him like a sleeping predator, 45 miles of wilderness wrapped in the frigid embrace of Lake Superior. He adjusted the straps on his backpack, feeling the weight of his field equipment, GPS unit, and satellite phone, the tools of a man who believed the universe could be measured, categorized, and understood. Christopher had spent 12 years studying wildlife behavior across North America, from the Everglades to Denali. He'd tracked mountain lions through Colorado's high country, documented wolf pack dynamics in Yellowstone, and survived a charging grizzly in Glacier. He approached nature with the same methodical precision he'd learned at Cornell. Observe, record, analyze, conclude. The natural world had rules, patterns, ecological logic. Even its dangers followed predictable trajectories. Madison's disappearance defied those patterns. The ranger station sat empty, its windows dark despite the early afternoon hour. Christopher had spoken to Madison exactly once, 3 weeks ago, when he'd called to arrange his research permit for the island's moose population study. She'd been professional, efficient, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who'd spent 5 years managing one of the most remote parks in the continental United States. Now she was gone, and the mainland authorities had called him because he was the only researcher scheduled to visit before the park closed for winter. "You're a wildlife expert," the park superintendent had said over the phone, his voice tight with bureaucratic anxiety. Madison sent some unusual reports in her final transmissions about the animals. "We need someone who can interpret what she might have been seeing." Christopher pushed open the station door. The interior smelled of stale coffee and something else, something organic and unpleasant he couldn't immediately identify. Madison's workspace was a study in contrasts. One wall displayed topographic maps marked with neat, color-coded notations tracking moose movements and wolf territories. Her desk held standard ranger equipment, two-way radio, weather monitor, incident reports filed in meticulous chronological order. But her personal workstation told a different story. Christopher's breath caught as he examined the corkboard above her computer. Photographs, dozens of them pinned in overlapping layers. Dead moose, their bodies splayed in unnatural positions. A wolf pack, 7 animals lying in a perfect circle, their throats torn out. Ravens, hundreds of them, impaled on tree branches like grotesque ornaments. Each photo was labeled with GPS coordinates and dates spanning the last 6 weeks. The kills were wrong. Christopher had documented predation his entire career. He understood the brutal efficiency of natural death. Wolves killed to eat, expending minimal energy for maximum return. These animals had been slaughtered with what looked like savage abandon, their bodies mutilated far beyond any predatory purpose. Madison's handwritten notes covered the margins of her maps in increasingly erratic script. Migration pattern impossible. Moving away from winter range. Nutritional analysis contradicts starvation hypothesis. Bone marrow present but unconsumed. And then, in letters that pressed so hard they tore the paper, something is hunting them. Not wolves, not bear. What? Christopher photographed everything with his digital camera, his scientist's mind already formulating hypotheses. Disease could explain aberrant behavior, chronic wasting disease perhaps, or some novel prion infection causing neurological damage. Madison might have been observing the initial outbreak of an epidemic, something that made animals behave irrationally before succumbing. But disease didn't explain the final item on Madison's desk. The journal was small, bound in weather-beaten leather, its pages filled with handwriting that wasn't Madison's. The script was older, more formal, dated entries stretching back to 1847. Christopher opened it carefully, recognizing immediately that he was handling a historical document of potential significance. July 15, 1847, the first entry read, "We have established our copper mining operation on the island's northern shore. The Ojibwe who guided us here refused to venture beyond the shoreline. Their elder, a man called Makwa, spoke of Wendigo, spirits of eternal hunger that walk during the harsh winters. He claims this island is cursed, that something terrible happened here long ago. I assured him we fear no native superstitions." Christopher flipped through the pages, watching as the confident tone deteriorated into something desperate. August entries described missing equipment and spoiled food stores. September brought reports of men hearing voices in the forest, of shapes moving between trees that disappeared when pursued. October detailed the first death. A miner named Thomas Wickham found 5 miles from camp, his body partially consumed despite grizzled wolves lying dead around him, their bellies empty. The final entry, dated November 2, 1847, consisted of 3 words repeated over and over until the page was black with ink. "It is hunger, it is hunger, it is hunger, it is hunger." Christopher set the journal down with hands that had begun, almost imperceptibly, to tremble. He was a scientist. He didn't believe in spirits or curses, but Madison had believed in something. She'd been tracking those old mining sites, marking them on her maps with red X's that formed a rough circle around the island's interior. His satellite phone buzzed. The screen showed a text from park headquarters. "Any sign of Ranger Chen? Weather turning. Ferry won't run after tomorrow. Advise immediate extraction if no contact." Christopher typed a response, his thumbs clumsy with cold. "At station now. Found unusual evidence. Request 24 hours to check her last known location. Will report tonight." The lie came easily. He'd already decided to follow Madison's trail into the interior, though he couldn't have articulated why. Perhaps it was professional curiosity. Perhaps it was the challenge to his rational worldview represented by those impossible photographs. Or perhaps it was something in that journal, some quality of genuine terror that transcended the century and a half separating him from the words. He gathered supplies methodically: water, high-calorie rations, emergency shelter, first aid kit, flares. His rifle, a Winchester .308 he'd carried for years, went into the scabbard on his pack. For grizzlies, he always told people. Isle Royale had no grizzlies, but the weight felt reassuring nonetheless. Madison's final GPS coordinates placed her 17 miles northeast, near one of the old mining sites. Christopher set out at a steady pace, following the narrow trail that wound through stands of birch and pine. The forest was silent. Not peaceful silent, absent silent. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no rustling of small mammals in the undergrowth. Just the crunch of his boots on frost-hardened earth and the whisper of wind through bare branches. 4 hours of hiking brought him to the first anomaly. A clearing, roughly circular, where every tree had been stripped of bark from ground level to about 7 feet up. The exposed wood was scored with deep gouges, as if something had clawed frantically at the trunks. Christopher knelt to examine the marks, his field training automatically engaging. The gouges were too wide for bear claws, too deep for anything he recognized. Fresh sap wept from the wounds. This had happened recently, within days. In the center of the clearing lay a moose calf, perhaps 6 months old. It had died badly. Christopher approached cautiously, noting the absence of bloating or significant decomposition despite the cold. Predators should have been here already. Wolves, ravens, even foxes. The calf's body remained untouched. He pulled on latex gloves and conducted a field necropsy, his hands working with practiced efficiency, even as his mind struggled to interpret what he found. The animal's hindquarters had been torn away with massive force, exposing the spine and rib cage. But the nutritious organs, heart, liver, kidneys, remained intact. The marrow-rich bones were uncracked. Whatever had killed this calf hadn't been interested in eating it. Christopher's camera clicked steadily, documenting everything. This was data. Data could be analyzed, explained, fit into existing frameworks of understanding. He'd seen unusual predation before, cats that killed for sport, bears that destroyed elk calves through apparent malice rather than hunger. Nature wasn't always efficient or logical, despite what the textbooks claimed. But as he packed away his equipment, Christopher felt something he'd rarely experienced in the wilderness, the primal sensation of being watched, not by a curious animal or protective mother. This felt predatory, calculating, patient. He turned slowly, scanning the tree line, his hand drifting to the rifle slung across his chest. Nothing, just trees and shadows and the gray light of approaching dusk. He made camp another 3 miles up the trail, choosing a site with good visibility and a large boulder at his back. His tent went up quickly, a professional setup that would withstand any early winter storm. He started a fire, boiled water for freeze-dried beef stew, and tried not to think about the crushing silence surrounding him. The satellite phone showed no signal. That was normal for Isle Royale. The island's terrain created dead zones. He'd report in tomorrow from higher ground. Christopher ate mechanically, his mind reviewing the day's findings. The journal, the photographs, the mutilated animals. They formed a pattern, he was certain, but he lacked sufficient data points to see it clearly. Darkness fell with the absolute completeness found only in true wilderness. Christopher's fire pushed back the night in a small, fragile circle. He added more wood, larger pieces than necessary, feeling an irrational need to keep the flames high. The cold had intensified, dropping below freezing despite his weather app predicting milder temperatures. His breath formed thick clouds in the firelight. That's when he heard it. A sound that started at the edge of audibility and slowly crescendoed into something that made every muscle in his body lock with primal terror. It wasn't quite a scream. Screams were human, comprehensible. This was something else. A shriek that carried notes of anguish and rage, and underneath it all an insatiable, maddening hunger. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off trees and rocks, distorting distance and direction. Christopher grabbed his rifle, chambering a round with shaking hands. The sound continued for perhaps 30 seconds, an eternity when every instinct screams to flee. Then silence crashed back down, somehow more oppressive than before. Just an animal, he whispered to himself, his voice embarrassingly thin. Screech owl, maybe a fox. Acoustic distortion from the terrain. But he'd heard screech owls and foxes. He'd heard mountain lions scream in the Rocky Mountain darkness, a sound that could freeze the blood of the most experienced outdoorsman. This was different. This was wrong on a fundamental level that preceded language and logic. Christopher didn't sleep that night. He sat with his back against the boulder, rifle across his lap, feeding the fire until his supply of gathered wood was exhausted. When dawn finally came, gray and reluctant, he'd never been so grateful for sunlight. The morning revealed fresh tracks circling his campsite. Christopher knelt to examine them, his exhausted mind struggling to process what he saw. They were humanoid, but wrong. The basic shape of a barefoot human print, but elongated, the toes tipped with what looked like claws, pressed deep into the frozen earth with weight that suggested something massive. The stride length between tracks was impossible, spanning 10 or 12 feet where a human might manage 3. The tracks had circled his camp multiple times during the night, always staying just beyond the firelight's reach. In several places, deep gouges scarred nearby trees at 8 or 9 feet high, as if something had stretched up to mark them. Christopher photographed everything with mechanical precision, his scientific training a shield against the growing dread in his chest. There had to be an explanation. A hoax, perhaps. Someone messing with him, though who and why made no sense. Or his exhaustion was making him misinterpret natural phenomena. Yes, that was rational. He was tired, stressed, seeing patterns that didn't exist. He consulted Madison's map, marking his position against her route. She'd gone another 6 miles north, to the site marked Wendigo Mine, 1847 operation. Christopher checked his rifle, loaded his pack, and started walking. What else could he do? Turn back? Abandon Madison to whatever had happened to her? Every scientific instinct he possessed demanded answers. The forest grew darker as he climbed, the evergreens thick enough to block most sunlight. Christopher began noticing other details that his rational mind kept trying to explain away. Trees snapped at their base, massive trunks twisted off as if by tornado force, though no storm had passed through. More circles of stripped bark, larger than the first, the claw marks deep enough to splinter the wood. And bones, scattered everywhere, moose, wolf, smaller animals, all showing the same pattern of violence without predation. Around midday, he found Madison's camp, or what remained of it. Her tent had been shredded, the high-quality fabric torn into ribbons. Her equipment lay scattered, smashed radio, broken GPS unit, scattered gear. But it was the tree that stopped Christopher's breath. A massive white pine, ancient and gnarled, its trunk carved with symbols that made his eyes hurt to track. They weren't random scratches. These were deliberate, forming patterns that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed peripherally. And underneath the symbols, scratched in desperate letters that bit deep into the bark, "It knows I'm here. It knows what I've learned. Wendigo is real. Don't follow me. Destroy the..." The message ended abruptly, as if whatever Madison had been carving had interrupted her. Christopher's hands shook as he photographed the tree. Destroy the what? What had she learned? He forced himself to search the campsite methodically, documenting everything. Madison's journal lay half-buried in fallen leaves. Christopher opened it with dread, reading her final entries. October 28th. The animal deaths are accelerating. I found the old mining site today. There are remains there, human remains, partially buried. Very old, but some are more recent. I think people have been disappearing on this island for a very long time. The Ojibwe legends aren't myths. There's something here. October 30th. It followed me back to camp last night. I never saw it clearly, but I know it was there. The trees bend away from it like they're afraid. I tried calling for extraction, but my radio is acting strange. The interference sounds like breathing. November 1st. Makwa was right. The journal from 1847 explains it. When those miners came here, they didn't know the island was a sacred burial ground. The Ojibwe had been containing something here for centuries, keeping it isolated, feeding it offerings during the harsh months so it wouldn't cross the lake to the mainland. The miners disrupted the rituals, they released it, and it's been here ever since, growing stronger every year. The Wendigo doesn't kill for food. It kills to spread hunger, to transform others into vessels for its endless starvation. I can feel it now in my head. The hunger. God, the hunger never stops. The final entry was dated yesterday. I'm going to the mine. There's something there that might stop it, something the Ojibwe left. If anyone finds this, the iron amulets in my pack, wear them. And whatever you do, don't let it bite you. The hunger is contagious. I can already feel myself changing. So hungry, so terribly, eternally hungry. Christopher looked up from the journal, his heart hammering. Madison's pack lay nearby. With trembling fingers, he opened it, finding 3 small amulets made of worked iron, each engraved with symbols that matched those on the tree. He hung one around his neck immediately, then pocketed the others, feeling foolish even as he did so. He was a scientist. He didn't believe in monsters or magic talismans, but he'd also never seen tracks like those circling his camp. Never heard a sound like last night's shriek. Never felt the kind of wrongness that permeated this place. Something was happening here that his education hadn't prepared him for. The mine entrance lay a half-mile further up the trail, marked by collapsed timbers and a black opening that seemed to swallow light. Christopher approached slowly, every nerve screaming at him to turn back. His flashlight beam penetrated perhaps 20 feet into the darkness before the shadows consumed it. He didn't have to go in. He could return to the station, call for help, let properly equipped search teams handle this. That was the rational choice, the safe choice. But Madison was still missing, and Christopher had spent his entire life believing that understanding defeated fear, that knowledge was power, that the universe yielded to logical inquiry. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. Christopher descended into the mine. The tunnel angled down sharply, the walls rough-hewn by hand tools over a century ago. His flashlight played across support beams black with age and moisture. The temperature dropped with each step, his breath forming thick clouds in the beam. The silence here was different from the forest's oppressive quiet. This was the silence of the deep earth, absolute and smothering. 20 yards in, he found the first body. The miner's skeleton lay against the tunnel wall, still wearing the rotted remnants of 1840s work clothes. Christopher's flashlight revealed marks on the bones that made his stomach lurch. Deep scores from something that had gnawed the skeletal remains with savage intensity. The skull was split open, the interior scraped clean. More bodies appeared as he progressed deeper. 7 in total, all positioned as if they'd been trying to escape when death took them. The final miner lay sprawled across the tunnel floor, one hand outstretched toward the surface, finger bones scratched raw from clawing at the stone. Christopher's flashlight beam caught something beyond the bodies. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, a natural cave that the miners had excavated into. The walls here were covered in symbols, not the Ojibwe markings from outside, but older glyphs carved deep into living rock. And in the center of the chamber, built from carefully placed stones, stood a cairn. The structure was roughly man-height, its stones fitted together with obvious reverence. More iron amulets hung from its peak, dozens of them, their weight causing the structure to lean slightly. And at the cairn's base, barely visible in the flashlight beam, lay a body in modern ranger's clothing. Madison, Christopher breathed, rushing forward. She was curled in a fetal position, her skin paper white, her lips blue with cold. Christopher pressed fingers to her throat, feeling for a pulse. There, faint but present. She was alive. Barely. "Madison," he said, shaking her shoulder. "Madison, wake up. I'm Christopher, the biologist. I'm here to help." Her eyes opened. They were wrong. The irises had paled to nearly white. The pupils contracted to pinpricks despite the darkness. And there was something in her gaze that made Christopher recoil, a terrible, all-consuming hunger that had nothing to do with physical need. "Too late," Madison whispered, her voice harsh and damaged. "It bit me. 3 days ago. I can feel it spreading, changing me. The hunger. Christ, Christopher, the hunger is everything. It's all I can think about. I want to tear and rend and consume, but eating doesn't help. Nothing helps. The hunger just grows. We need to get you out of here," Christopher said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Medical attention, whatever this is." "Not an infection." Madison cut him off, her laugh brittle and broken. "Not a disease. It's spiritual. The Wendigo doesn't just kill, it transforms. It spreads hunger like a virus, turns people into extensions of itself. The Ojibwe tried to contain it here, on this island. They built this cairn over something, some weakness in the creature. That's why it can't leave Isle Royale. But it's been growing stronger. Soon it won't need to stay." A sound echoed down the tunnel. That shriek Christopher had heard last night, closer now, vibrating through the stone itself. Madison's body went rigid, her back arching, a look of ecstatic agony crossing her face. "It's calling," she gasped. "It knows you're here. It's so hungry, Christopher, and I'm so hungry. God help me, I want to bite you. I want to spread the hunger. It would be so easy." Christopher backpedaled, his hand finding his rifle. "Fight it, Madison. Whatever this is, you can fight it." "No," she said, and now her voice carried harmonics that weren't human. as if something else spoke through her. No one fights the hunger. The hunger is patient. The hunger is eternal. You think you can leave this island? It's already marked you. You've walked in its territory, breathed its air, felt its attention. The hunger will follow you home, spread to everyone you touch, grow and grow until... She lunged. Despite her weakened state, Madison moved with horrifying speed, her hands twisted into claws, her teeth bared. Christopher fired instinctively, the rifle's report deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet took Madison in the shoulder, spinning her sideways. She fell but immediately began to rise again, the wound bleeding but not stopping her. "I'm sorry," Christopher whispered, and fired again. This time Madison stayed down, her body twitching once before going still. Her eyes remained open, staring at him with a mixture of relief and rage and that terrible, endless hunger. Christopher stood frozen, his scientific mind trying and failing to process what had just happened. He'd killed a woman, a ranger who'd been trying to do her job, who'd stumbled onto something impossible and paid the price. But she'd been changing into something else, hadn't she? She'd said it herself. The hunger was transforming her, making her into a vector for whatever haunted this island. The shriek came again, much closer. The tunnel walls seemed to shudder with the sound. And then Christopher heard something worse. Footsteps. Not the bootfalls of a human, but the heavy, deliberate tread of something massive descending into the mine. He ran, professional dignity, scientific curiosity, courage, all of it evaporated in the face of that approaching presence. Christopher sprinted toward the tunnel entrance, his flashlight beam jerking wildly, illuminating glimpses of the skeletal miners as he passed. Behind him, the footsteps accelerated and he heard breathing, wet, labored, the sound of damaged lungs struggling to draw air. Christopher burst from the mine entrance into twilight. When had it gotten so late? He'd only been inside for an hour, maybe two, but the sun was setting, casting the forest in blood-red light. He didn't stop running, crashing through undergrowth, his rifle forgotten, his pack bouncing against his spine. A tree exploded to his left, massive trunk snapping as something struck it with tremendous force. Christopher risked a glance back and immediately wished he hadn't. The thing pursuing him wasn't invisible, but his eyes struggled to focus on it as if his brain refused to process what it saw. Tall, incredibly tall, perhaps 9 or 10 feet, with limbs too long and joints that bent in wrong directions. Its skin was the gray-white of frostbite, stretched over bones that pressed against it like knives. And its face. God, its face was the worst part. Vaguely human but elongated, the jaw unhinged and hanging open to reveal rows of broken, mismatched teeth. Its eyes blazed with terrible intelligence and insatiable hunger. The Wendigo, real, undeniable, impossible but present, chasing him through the darkening forest with horrifying speed. Christopher's lungs burned, his legs screaming, but terror drove him forward. He could hear it behind him, crashing through the forest, its breathing wet and eager. Something that should have been dead 1,000 times over, sustained by nothing but endless, aching hunger. His satellite phone buzzed in his pocket. Impossible, he was in a dead zone. But he yanked it out anyway, seeing a text message displayed in stuttering, glitching letters. Ferry leaving, last boat, now. The dock was 5 miles away. Christopher angled his flight trajectory southwest, praying he could maintain his pace. Behind him, the Wendigo shrieked, the sound mixing with something that might have been words. Hungry, always hungry. Join us. Feed the hunger. Christopher ran until his vision blurred and his heart felt ready to burst. He ran past mutilated animals and stripped trees and signs of carnage that made no sense. He ran while the darkness deepened and his flashlight died and the cold intensified to bone-aching levels. And behind him, patient and inevitable, the Wendigo followed. The dock lights appeared through the trees like salvation. Christopher could see the ferry, its running lights on, the captain standing at the helm checking his watch. Just half a mile. He could make it. Something grabbed his pack, yanking him backward with irresistible force. Christopher twisted, shrugging out of the straps, leaving his equipment behind. The Wendigo held the empty pack, its head tilted in confusion or curiosity, and Christopher used those precious seconds to sprint the final distance to the dock. "Go!" he screamed at the captain. "Start the engine! Go, go, go!" The captain, an old-timer named Harold who'd probably seen everything Lake Superior could throw at a man, took one look at Christopher's face and fired up the diesel without question. Christopher leaped aboard as the boat pulled away, falling to the deck, gasping for air. He looked back at the dock. The Wendigo stood at the edge of the wood, its elongated form barely visible in the twilight. It didn't pursue, didn't try to board. Just stood there watching with those hungry eyes as the ferry churned toward the mainland. But Christopher could feel its attention, could sense its satisfaction. Because Madison had been right. He'd been marked. The hunger was already there, tiny and insidious, curling at the edges of his mind. Not physical hunger, something deeper, more terrible. An emptiness that food couldn't fill, a void that grew with each heartbeat. Christopher touched the iron amulet at his throat, finding small comfort in its cold weight. "You okay?" Harold called from the helm. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Christopher almost laughed. A ghost would have been manageable. Ghosts were dead, finite, bound by rules and limitations. What he'd encountered was something far worse, an endless hunger given physical form, patient and eternal and impossible to kill because it was already dead, had always been dead, would always be dead. "I need to report this," Christopher said, pulling out his satellite phone. "People need to know what's on that island." But as he scrolled through his photos, his blood ran cold. Every image was corrupted, showing only static and shadow. The camera had recorded nothing. His notes, his evidence, Madison's journal, all of it left behind in his abandoned pack. He had no proof, no data, nothing that could convince anyone that Isle Royale harbored something from humanity's darkest folklore. Just his word, and the hunger, growing steadily in his mind. Christopher stared back at the island as it disappeared into the darkness. He knew with terrible certainty that his ordeal wasn't over. The Wendigo had let him leave, had allowed him to escape. Not out of mercy or weakness, but because Christopher was more useful alive, carrying the hunger back to the mainland, spreading it like a seed that would germinate and grow. How long did he have before the hunger consumed him? Before he became like Madison, desperate and changing, driven to bite and infect others? Days? Weeks? The iron amulet might slow the process, but it wouldn't stop it. Nothing stopped the Wendigo's hunger. Christopher thought about his apartment in Chicago, about the university campus where he taught, about the crowds of students and colleagues he'd encounter, about his sister and her children, his elderly parents, his colleagues and friends. All of them potential vectors for the hunger, all of them at risk if he couldn't find a way to contain what was growing inside him. He pulled out his phone and began typing an email to park headquarters, detailing everything he'd witnessed, knowing even as he wrote that no one would believe him. But he had to try. Someone needed to understand the danger, needed to realize that Isle Royale couldn't be allowed to open next spring, that the Wendigo had to remain isolated. The ferry plowed through the dark water, carrying Christopher toward safety that was no safety at all. He touched the iron amulet again, feeling the hunger pulse against it like a living thing. How long could iron hold back eternity? How long before the hunger broke through? In the distance, barely audible over the engine's rumble, Christopher heard that terrible shriek echo across Lake Superior, a sound of triumph, of anticipation, of endless, insatiable hunger. The Wendigo could wait. It had waited for centuries. What were a few more days or weeks while the hunger spread, transforming a rational man of science into another vessel for its endless starvation? Christopher gripped the ferry's railing until his knuckles went white, staring at the lights of the mainland growing closer. He was bringing something back with him, something ancient and terrible and patient, and despite all his education, all his scientific training, all his rational certainty about the world's rules, he had no idea how to stop it. The hunger whispered in his mind, patient and eternal. Soon, soon, soon. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? Isle Royale National Park, Michigan, February 2009. The blood had frozen in patterns that looked almost deliberate. James Whitmore stood in the clearing, his breath forming clouds in the -20 air, and studied the crimson streaks painted across the birch bark. 42 years old, 20 years with the National Park Service, and he'd never seen anything quite like this. The patterns weren't random spatter. They were too controlled, too purposeful, almost like symbols. Base, this is Ranger Whitmore. I'm at the coordinates Mitchell gave me. You're going to want to send the forensics team from Houghton. He released the radio button, listening to the static crackle in the absolute silence of the winter forest. Isle Royale in February was a dead place. The tourist season ended in October. Only a skeleton crew of rangers remained, maintaining the facilities for the handful of winter researchers and the occasional ice fishermen who made the treacherous crossing from the mainland. Kayla Henderson hadn't been a researcher or a fisherman. According to her emergency contact, she'd been an experienced winter hiker who'd gotten special permission for a solo trek across the island. That was 8 days ago. Her expected checkout was 5 days overdue. The radio crackled. Copy that, Whitmore. What have you got? James looked at the scene again, his trained eye cataloging details. Blood evidence, a lot of it. Frozen clothing scattered around the area, no body yet. He paused, studying the tree line. And something else. Markings. Could be territorial, could be ritual. I'm not sure. Ritual? James, are you... Just send the team, Carol, and tell Mitchell to bring the cold weather gear. Real cold weather gear. He'd found Kayla's campsite 2 miles back, abandoned but strangely intact. Her tent stood upright, no signs of struggle. Her pack remained, food untouched. Only her sleeping bag was missing, and her winter parka. The lack of disturbance had bothered him more than violence would have. People didn't just walk away from their supplies in February on Isle Royale. The island sat in the middle of Lake Superior, 45 miles from the nearest mainland. The lake was frozen now, but the ice was treacherous, riddled with pressure cracks and weak spots. Without proper gear, exposure would kill you in hours. But Kayla Henderson had training. She'd summited Denali. She'd done winter camping in the Yukon. She wouldn't have made rookie mistakes. James followed the trail of disturbed snow from the campsite to this clearing. The tracks were strange. They started as normal boot prints, Kayla's size 7 hiking boots, but they became erratic, staggering. In several places it looked like she'd fallen, or been dragged. And then, about 50 yards from the clearing, the boot prints were joined by something else. Larger prints, barefoot, in -20 weather. James knelt beside one of the larger prints, pulling out his camera. The impression was deep, the toes spread unnaturally wide. The stride length was wrong, too long for a normal human gait. He photographed it from multiple angles, then stood and followed the dual trail into the clearing where the blood started. That's when he noticed the trees. Symbols had been carved into the bark, old carvings, weathered but still visible. Not the usual graffiti or trail markers. These were different. Geometric patterns, spirals, angular shapes that hurt to look at too long. And beneath them, fresher marks, gouged deep into the wood, as if by claws. James had grown up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. His grandmother had been Ojibwe, and she'd told him stories. Old stories. The kind that kept kids from wandering into the woods alone. Stories about the Weedico, the winter cannibal, the spirit of eternal hunger. He'd dismissed them as folklore, cultural mythology designed to teach lessons about survival and the dangers of greed. But his grandmother had never smiled when she told those stories. He circled the clearing, documenting everything. The blood patterns formed a rough circle, with the heaviest concentration at the center. Kayla's clothes lay in tatters, her thermal underwear shredded, her parka torn open as if by tremendous force. But no body, no bones, nothing but blood and cloth, and those impossible tracks leading away into the deeper forest. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees since he'd entered the clearing. His exposed skin burned. His fingers were going numb despite the heavy gloves. He needed to get back to the station before dark, but something made him hesitate. Some instinct, some ancient recognition that he was standing in a place where something terrible had happened. Or was still happening. That's when he heard it. A sound that shouldn't exist. A voice, thin and distant, calling his name. James. He spun, hand instinctively going to the bear spray on his belt. The forest was empty. Nothing but snow-laden pines and the absolute stillness of deep winter. Hello? His voice sounded too loud, too vulnerable. Kayla Henderson? If you can hear me, call out. Only silence answered. But the temperature had dropped again. He could feel it, an unnatural cold that pressed against him like a physical weight. His breath froze instantly, falling as ice crystals. James made his decision. He'd mark the site, photograph everything, and get back to base. This was beyond his expertise now. This was a recovery operation, possibly a criminal investigation. He'd done his part. He turned to leave and stopped. Fresh tracks crossed his entry trail. The same large, barefoot impressions, but these were new. He'd been alone in the clearing for 20 minutes, and these tracks hadn't been here when he arrived, which meant something had circled behind him while he worked. James pulled out his flashlight, though it was only mid-afternoon. The forest seemed darker than it should be, the shadows deeper. He followed the new tracks with the beam. They led around the clearing's perimeter, always staying just inside the tree line. Watching, observing, stalking. He keyed his radio. Base, this is Whitmore. I'm heading back now. ETA, 40 minutes. He kept his voice steady, professional. No need to alarm Carol with speculation. Have Mitchell meet me at the Wendigo station, and Carol, if you don't hear from me in an hour, send someone. James, what's going on? Just being cautious. Weather's getting worse. It wasn't the weather. The sky was clear, painfully blue. But something was wrong. Every instinct honed by 20 years in the backcountry screamed at him to move, to get out of these woods. He started hiking back toward the trail, moving quickly but carefully. The snow was deep, his snowshoes sinking with each step. Behind him, he heard something else moving through the forest. Not trying to be quiet. Branches snapping. The crunch of snow under weight. James didn't look back. Looking back would mean acknowledging what he already knew on some primal level, that he was being followed by something that moved through -20 weather without protection. Something that left tracks too large to be human. Something hungry. The trail seemed longer than before. The familiar landmarks looked strange, foreign. He'd hiked this island hundreds of times, knew every trail, every shelter. But now the forest felt alien, hostile. The trees pressed in too close. The shadows moved wrong. James. The voice again, closer now. Definitely female. Definitely coming from behind him. He stopped against his better judgment and turned. The trail stretched empty behind him. Snow-covered pines, the dying light of afternoon. Nothing else. Kayla? His voice cracked. Kayla Henderson, if that's you, you need medical attention. I'm a ranger. I can help you. Movement at the edge of his vision. Something pale disappearing behind a massive cedar. James approached slowly, one hand on his radio, ready to call for immediate assistance. The cedar stood alone, ancient and massive. He circled it, beam of his flashlight cutting through the gloom. Nothing. But carved into the bark, fresh and deep, new symbols and words, scratched in desperate, wavering letters. Hungry, 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 so hungry. His hands shook as he photographed the carving. The letters were formed by fingernails, human fingernails, and around the tree, a circle of the same barefoot tracks, dozens of them overlapping, as if someone had walked around and around the cedar for hours, carving that single word over and over. James backed away, his rationality fracturing. There had to be an explanation. Hypothermia caused hallucinations. Kayla could be suffering from severe exposure, experiencing psychosis. The barefoot tracks could be explained by paradoxical undressing, a known symptom of late-stage hypothermia, where victims feel burning hot and shed their clothes. But that didn't explain the symbols, the blood patterns, the deliberate arrangement of evidence at the clearing. The sun touched the horizon and the temperature plummeted. James started running. His snowshoes were awkward, but fear overrode caution. The Wendigo station was 2 miles ahead. Safety. Radio. Other people. Behind him, the sound of pursuit grew louder. No longer trying to hide. Branches exploded as something large crashed through the underbrush, getting closer. James risked a glance back and immediately wished he hadn't. Something moved between the trees. Tall. Impossibly tall. Pale as snow and gaunt as famine. It moved with a jerking, wrong-jointed gait, covering ground in tremendous strides. And its eyes, if those empty sockets could be called eyes, fixed on him with unmistakable intelligence. He stumbled, caught himself, kept running. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. The Vitico is never satisfied. It consumes and consumes, but the hunger only grows, and those it touches become hunger themselves. Mythology, folk tales, cultural warnings against the dangers of winter and isolation. Except it was real. It was chasing him, and it was gaining. The station appeared ahead, its dark shape silhouetted against the twilight sky. James hit the stairs at full speed, fumbled with frozen fingers at the door lock. Behind him, the thing emerged from the tree line. In the dying light, he saw it clearly. 7 feet tall, skeletal thin, skin stretched drum-tight over protruding bones. Its mouth hung open, jaw distended impossibly wide. And from that mouth came sounds, wet, clicking sounds, like bones scraping against each other. The door opened. James threw himself inside, slammed it, threw the bolt. He grabbed his radio, fingers barely working. Base, this is Whitmore, emergency, there's something. How could he explain? How could he make them understand? The window exploded inward. A hand reached through, too long, fingers ending in black claws. James scrambled back, grabbing the fire extinguisher from the wall. The hand grabbed at the air, searching. Those fingers were frostbitten black, but they moved with terrible purpose. Then it withdrew, and a face appeared at the broken window. Kayla Henderson's face. Or what had been Kayla Henderson. The features were recognizable but twisted, stretched. Her skin was pale as a corpse, her lips blue black, and her eyes were empty sockets filled with swirling darkness. "James," she whispered, her voice the sound of wind through bones. "I'm so hungry, James. So hungry. You can't imagine. It hurts. Make it stop. Feed it. Feed it and it stops hurting. Kayla, listen to me. You're sick. You need help. I can... Too late." The scream was barely human. "I ate, James. I was so cold and so hungry and I found it. The offering, the ritual, the old ways. I ate and it felt so good, but now I can't stop. I can't stop being hungry." It withdrew from the window. James heard it circling the station, testing doors, windows, looking for a way in. His radio crackled. James, we lost your signal. What's your status?" He grabbed it. "Carol, listen carefully. Don't send anyone to Wendigo Station. Don't send anyone to the island until spring. Quarantine the whole damn place if you have to." "What? James, you're not making sense. We've got the forensics team loading up now." "No!" He was shouting now, his composure shattered. "There's something on this island. Something old. It's got Kayla. It's changing her. And if anyone else comes here..." He looked at the window where Kayla's ruined face appeared again, pressed against the glass, watching him with that terrible hunger. "If anyone else comes here," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "it spreads." The scratching at the door intensified. Wood splintered. The heavy bolt shook in its housing. James backed into the corner, his rational mind finally accepting what he'd denied since finding the blood patterns. The old stories were true. The Whittico was real, And Kayla Henderson had found something in these woods, some corrupted ritual, some offering left by those who'd known how to keep the winter hunger contained. She'd broken a taboo he didn't even know existed, and the hunger had claimed her. The door burst open. Kayla stood in the entrance, her body contorted in ways that defied anatomy. Her jaw hung open, revealing rows of teeth that were too sharp, too many. Behind her, the darkness of the winter forest seemed to press forward, eager. "Join me," she whispered. "Just a taste, just a small bite. Then the hunger makes sense, then the cold doesn't hurt anymore. Then you understand." She took a step forward, then another. James closed his eyes, his grandmother's final warning echoing in his mind. Never eat in the hungry time, never take what the winter offers, because the Witiko's hunger is eternal, and it shares that eternity with all who taste it. When he opened his eyes, Kayla was inches away. Her breath, cold as the space between stars, washed over him. Her hand, those terrible black claws, reached for his face. "Choose," she whispered. "Predator or prey, hunger or food. There is nothing else now." The radio crackled one final time. "James, James, respond." But James Whitmore couldn't respond, because he was making a choice no rational man should ever have to make. And in the frozen darkness of Isle Royale, something ancient and eternally hungry laughed with voices that should have been human. They found the Wendigo station in April, when the ice finally broke. The door hung open. Blood painted the walls in those same deliberate patterns. 2 sets of tracks led away from the station into the forest. 1 pair of snowshoes, 1 set of impossibly large barefoot impressions, and in the corner, scratched into the wooden floor with what forensics determined to be fingernails, a message. "The hunger grows." The forensics team spent 3 days searching the island. They found no bodies, no evidence of James Whitmore or Kayla Henderson beyond their abandoned equipment and those haunting tracks that always led deeper into the island's interior. What they did find, in a cave on the island's north shore, were older symbols. Ancient petroglyphs that matched the carvings James had photographed. And beneath them, bones, human bones, some dating back centuries, and all of them showing signs of tooth marks. The Park Service closed Isle Royale indefinitely, citing ecological concerns. The official report listed both Whitmore and Henderson as lost to exposure, their bodies likely claimed by the lake or wildlife. But the rangers who'd worked with James knew better. Carol had heard his last transmission. She'd heard the fear in his voice, the rational mind of a 20-year veteran crumbling under the weight of something impossible. She'd also heard the other sounds on that transmission, the scratching, the wet, clicking noise. And underneath it all, a voice that might have been James Whitmore, repeating the same word over and over. Hungry, hungry, hungry. The island remained empty. The researchers never returned. The winter crews were reassigned, but sometimes, on the coldest February nights, pilots flying over Lake Superior report strange lights on Isle Royale, and fishermen on the mainland occasionally see figures on the frozen lake, walking from the island toward shore. Tall figures, moving with that wrong-jointed gait, always heading toward places where people gather, always searching, always hungry. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? The radio crackled at 6:47 a.m., pulling Matt Sullivan from a dream he couldn't quite remember. He'd been reaching for something in the dark, his fingers grazing moss-covered bark that felt wrong somehow. Too warm, too alive. "Ranger Sullivan, we have a missing hiker. Female, 21, last seen yesterday afternoon on the Hoh River Trail near the junction to 5 Mile Island." Dispatch's voice carried the particular flatness that came from reading from a report. "Family called it in 20 minutes ago. They were supposed to pick her up at the visitor center last night." Matt sat up, his hand already moving to the duty belt on his nightstand. His cabin window showed the characteristic gray pre-dawn of Olympic National Park in October, the kind of diffuse light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Copy. Sarah Chen? A pause. How'd you know? Saw her sign in at the trailhead yesterday morning. She was alone. He'd noticed because solo hikers always drew his attention, especially young ones who didn't understand how the Hoh rainforest could swallow a person whole. The ancient Sitka spruces and western hemlocks stood so close in places that the GPS signal simply died, and the moss-draped understory created a kind of green cathedral that distorted sound in ways that made even experienced rangers second-guess their bearings. Matt dressed quickly. Cargo pants, regulation fleece, the olive green jacket with the National Park Service patch that still felt too formal after 5 years. He strapped on his pack, checking by muscle memory. Radio, first aid kit, emergency blanket, GPS unit, water, energy bars, rope. The satellite phone went into his jacket pocket, though he knew from experience that the thick canopy would make it nearly useless, except at specific clearings he'd mapped over years. The drive to the Hoh River trailhead took 40 minutes through dense forest that pressed against the narrow road like it was trying to reclaim the asphalt. Matt's headlights caught the reflective eyes of a Roosevelt elk, massive and still, watching him pass. He thought about Sarah Chen. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, new boots that would give her blisters by mile 3, a University of Washington hoodie that marked her as precisely the type of unprepared day hiker who wandered into trouble. But she'd seemed careful when he'd chatted with her at the visitor center. She'd had a map, marked her route, told him she planned to hike to the glacier overlook and back, maybe 8 miles round trip. She'd even asked about bear protocol, writing down his answers in a small notebook. Smart girl, he'd thought then. Smart girls didn't usually disappear. The parking lot was empty except for a silver Honda Civic with a UW parking permit in the window. Matt radioed his arrival and started up the trail at a pace that would have left most hikers gasping. The path began wide and well-maintained. Boardwalks crossing the wettest sections where nurse logs hosted entire ecosystems of ferns and seedlings. The air smelled of decay and growth simultaneously, that particular perfume of a temperate rainforest where things died and were reborn in the same breath. He'd walked this trail hundreds of times in 5 years, could probably navigate it blindfolded by counting his steps. Left turn at the massive cedar with the fire scar, right at the boulder shaped like a crouching bear. The junction to 5 Mile Island appeared at mile 2.3, marked by a weathered sign and a narrowing of the trail that most day hikers avoided. Matt stopped there, studying the ground. The recent rain, and there was always recent rain, had turned the trail to mud that held impressions like memory. He found her boot prints easily enough, the tread pattern from new Merrill's heading deeper into the forest. But there was something else. The prints seemed to double back in places, circling certain trees as if she'd been looking for something, or... He pushed the thought away before it could form fully. Sarah. His voice disappeared into the moss-draped canopy, absorbed so completely it was like shouting into a pillow. Sarah Chen, park ranger, call out if you can hear me. Nothing but the whisper of wind through hemlock branches and the distant murmur of the Hoh River, running high with autumn rains. Matt continued deeper, following the boot prints. They stayed on the trail for another mile, then veered off onto what looked like an animal path, barely visible between the sword ferns and salal. This was wrong. Hikers didn't just wander off established trails, especially not careful ones who asked about bear protocols, unless they were chasing something, or running from something. He felt the old tightness in his chest, the one that had lived there since that night 3 years ago in Gifford Pinchot. The night they'd found Marcus Holloway standing waist-deep in a creek at 3 a.m., hypothermic and incoherent, babbling about a woman who'd called to him from the trees. Marcus, 30-year veteran ranger, toughest man Matt had ever known, had never returned to the forest. Last Matt heard, Marcus was managing a hardware store in Tacoma, refusing to even drive past anything that looked like woods. Matt had found Marcus, had wrapped him in emergency blankets and called for extraction. But he'd seen something in Marcus's eyes that night. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Like Marcus had finally understood something terrible and fundamental about the places they worked. The boot prints led him off trail for 20 minutes, deeper into the primeval forest where the trees grew so thick the undergrowth thinned to shadow. His GPS showed his position, but couldn't account for the disorientation he felt, the way the usual landmark seemed shifted. That cedar shouldn't be leaning that direction. That cluster of boulders wasn't on his mental map. Then he saw her. Sarah Chen stood maybe 40 yards ahead, facing away from him, her UW hoodie dark with moisture. She was utterly still in a way that living things rarely managed, like a deer that sensed a predator but hasn't yet decided which way to bolt. "Sarah," relief flooded through him. "Sarah, it's Ranger Sullivan. Are you hurt?" She didn't turn, didn't move at all. Matt approached carefully, aware of how thick the ferns grew here, how easy it would be to twist an ankle in the root systems that snaked across the forest floor. "Sarah, your family is worried. Can you hear me?" When he got within 10 feet, she turned. Her face was pale, lips slightly blue, eyes wide and dark. There was a small cut on her forehead, a thin line of dried blood disappearing into her hairline. "I can't find the trail," she said. Her voice was flat, distant. "I've been walking in circles, nothing looks right." Matt felt his ranger training kick in, pushing aside the unease that prickled up his spine. "That's okay. That happens. The forest can be disorienting. I know the way back. Come with me." He reached for her arm, but she stepped back. "I saw someone," she said. "Earlier. A woman. She was lost too. She asked me to help her, but when I tried to follow her, she disappeared. Then everything got confused." The tightness in Matt's chest doubled. "Sarah, there's no one else out here. No other hikers registered on this trail yesterday." "I know what I saw." Her voice gained an edge, the first sign of emotion. She was wearing old clothes, like really old, a long dress, and she kept saying she needed to find the river, but she couldn't remember which way. Matt's professional calm wavered. 3 years ago, Marcus had described a woman in old-fashioned clothes, a woman who'd led him deeper and deeper until he was completely lost, until he'd walked right into the creek without even noticing the water. "Show me where you saw her," he said, keeping his voice level. Sarah nodded and started walking. Matt followed, marking trees with his knife as they went, old habit that his training sergeant had drilled into him. Always leave a trail back. The forest grew darker, though it couldn't have been later than 9 in the morning. The canopy closed in, big leaf maples intertwining with hemlock until the sky disappeared completely. "Here." Sarah stopped in a small clearing where a massive old cedar had fallen, its trunk wider than Matt was tall. She was sitting on the log. She said her name was Margaret. The clearing felt wrong, too quiet. No birds, no squirrels chittering, no rustle of small mammals in the undergrowth. Just the sound of Matt's breathing and Sarah's, too fast and shallow. "Sarah, we need to head back now. I've marked our trail. Let's—" "There she is," Sarah interrupted, pointing to the far side of the clearing. Matt saw nothing, just more trees, more ferns, more moss-covered everything. "Sarah, there's no one. She's right there. Don't you see her?" Sarah took a step forward, then another. "Margaret, I brought help. He's a ranger. He knows the way." Matt grabbed Sarah's arm, gentle but firm. Her skin was cold, too cold for someone who'd been walking all night. "Sarah, listen to me. We're leaving. Now. Together." She looked at him, and for a moment her eyes cleared. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I've been walking forever. Nothing makes sense. Every time I think I've found the trail, it disappears. And Margaret keeps calling to me. She says if I just follow her, we'll find the river, and the river leads out." "The river leads deeper in," Matt said. "That's the problem. The hoe runs through the heart of the park. Following it means going farther from the trailhead." Sarah's eyes lost focus again. "But Margaret says—" "Margaret isn't real." The words came out harsher than Matt intended. "Sarah, you're hypothermic and exhausted. Your brain is playing tricks. I've seen this before. We need to get you warm and—" A sound cut through the forest. A woman's voice, distant and echoing, impossible to pinpoint. "Sarah? Where did you go? I'm still lost. Please come back. Please help me." Matt felt every hair on his body stand up. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off trees, rising from the moss-covered ground. Sarah's face lit up with desperate hope. "See? She's real. We have to help her." "No." Matt pulled Sarah closer, wrapping his emergency blanket around her shoulders. "That's not real. That's not—" "Help me," the voice called again, and this time it sounded closer. "I've been lost so long, so many years. Please, I can't find my way. I can't remember how I got here." Sarah tried to pull away from Matt, but he held firm. "Margaret, we're coming." "Your name isn't Margaret." Matt found himself saying it, certain somehow, the certainty coming from the same place that had made him check on Marcus 3 years ago, that had made him carry emergency flares after that, even though protocol said they were unnecessary. "Is it?" The voice changed, dropped its plaintive tone and became something else, something flat and ancient. "No." Sarah stopped struggling. In the sudden stillness, Matt could hear his own heart hammering. "I don't remember my name," the voice continued. "I don't remember much at all, just the walking, just the looking, just the loneliness." Matt's radio crackled, static and broken fragments that might have been dispatched trying to reach him, but the canopy was too thick here, the forest too dense. He was on his own. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that?" She nodded, and he felt her trembling under the emergency blanket. "Whatever that is, it's not a person who needs help. It's something that traps people here, makes them lost, I think." He struggled with the words, with believing them even as he said them. "I think it was a person once. Someone who got lost so long ago that dying and not dying got confused. And now it makes others lost too, because that's all it knows how to do." "That's so sad," Sarah whispered. It was. It was impossibly, terribly sad. Matt thought about Marcus, thought about how close his colleague had come to joining whatever Margaret, whatever she really was, had become. How close Sarah had come. "Help me," the voice called again, and now it sounded like crying, desperate and broken. "Please, I'm so alone. I've been alone so long." Matt made a decision that went against every instinct his ranger training had instilled. He didn't call out, didn't try to help. Instead, he took Sarah's hand and started backing away, following the marks he'd carved into the trees. One step, then another, keeping his eyes on the clearing where nothing visible moved, but where he could feel something watching, waiting. "I can't leave her," Sarah protested, but weakly now. "She's already left," Matt said. "A long time ago. We're just hearing what's left behind." They walked for 30 minutes by Matt's watch, but it felt like hours. The forest slowly lightened, the oppressive weight lifting. Bird calls returned, tentative at first, then normal. A Douglas squirrel chattered irritation at their passage. The world remembered how to be alive again. When they reached the main trail, Sarah's legs gave out. Matt caught her, got her sitting, got water and energy bars into her while he radioed for assistance. She'd need to be checked for hypothermia, for injuries, for whatever psychological trauma a night lost in the deep forest would bring. "Did that really happen?" she asked, her voice small. "Or did I imagine it?" Matt looked back the way they'd come. The trail behind them looked perfectly ordinary, perfectly safe. Just trees and moss and the eternal dampness of a temperate rainforest. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe both." The extraction team arrived within the hour. 2 rangers Matt knew well, professionals who took Sarah's vital signs and wrapped her in more emergency blankets and asked the standard questions about injuries and orientation. Sarah answered mechanically, and Matt saw her eyes already beginning to doubt, her rational mind trying to explain away what had happened as exhaustion and fear and the tricks that shadows played. Maybe that was better. Maybe that was the only way to keep living normally, to walk in forests without terror, to forget. Matt filed his report that evening, sitting in his cabin as rain drummed on the roof. He wrote about finding Sarah Chen approximately 2.8 miles from the trailhead, off trail by roughly 0.4 miles. He noted signs of mild hypothermia and disorientation, consistent with exposure. He mentioned that she reported seeing another hiker, but that no evidence of additional persons was found. He didn't mention the voice. He didn't mention Margaret or whatever had spoken with her words. That kind of thing didn't go in official reports. That night, Matt dreamed about the forest. In the dream, he was looking for something, walking deeper and deeper into the green darkness, and somewhere ahead he could hear someone calling. A woman's voice, familiar somehow, though he couldn't place it. In the dream, he knew he should turn back, knew he should mark the trees, knew every rule that might save him. But in the dream, he kept walking, just like Marcus had, just like Sarah almost had. When he woke, his window showed another gray dawn, another day in the forest. Matt, dressed in his ranger uniform, checked his gear, prepared for whatever calls might come. But before he left, he pulled out a small notebook and wrote a single line. Some people get lost in the woods. Some woods get lost in people. He didn't know which was worse. Thank you for reading to the end. If you enjoyed this narrative, consider following for more immersive stories. What's your interpretation of what Margaret really was? A ghost, a psychic imprint of the forest, or something else entirely? I'd love to read your theories in the comments.